should we maybe just drop down now to 16 big blinds?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's not gonna be that different, but like
Yeah.
mostly a little bit more shoving when it comes to GTO, especially because just we're shallower, and I mean again we're out of position. So as you have like explained before, right? We care less a little bit about playing post flop out of position. So in GTO, that ends up meaning that even at 16, which is still like reasonably deep, we start to shove a lot of hands. So green here is shoving.
Yes.
In the first picture, I think there was also very little green. I think twos and ace nine mostly was shoving there, but very few hands. And now, as you can see, but almost all of us offsuit ace X are shoving, which is like by far the biggest fraction of that. And on top of that, some of the semi bluffs, like the suited connected middle stuff, like 9-7 suited, 8-7 suited, 8-6 suited, like this, those hands in the middle basically, and the low pockets are also usually shoving. And then you have still some mixing, you know, with like the low suited kings and like Jack 10, King Queen, King Jack.
Yeah. Well, this is where I kind of remind myself that we flop the positions post flop, but shoving actually works exactly the same small blind versus big blind as it does heads up. All of the EVs work exactly the same way. You're up against the exact same range. I mean, maybe they call slightly different because you open shove slightly different, but more or less it's the exact same thing. And so the value as an action of open shoving hasn't changed. But we do know that the value of an action of limping or min raising has basically always gotten worse because we're out of position instead of in position. Like that can't really help us. So it kind of makes sense that suddenly, you know, it's not really that open shoving has gotten better. It's that everything else has gotten worse while open shoving actually stays the same. And so, of course, we can see it being used a lot more, especially in a GTO context where playing out of position versus someone who's always knows your ranges is and maximally exploiting them is extra tricky. So that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And otherwise, like, this model's using 2.22 big blinds now. So this is pretty close to a min raise. So you can basically think of this as a min raise now.
Yes, and otherwise, like besides the shoving, that's mostly the difference to 25. Nothing really changed. Like the top of our range is still raising, at the bottom of our range is still mostly limping, and there's a little bit more open folding now. Of course, like the low suit, the worst suited hands and Jack 6 and Jack 6 also folded before, but a little bit more open folding, and otherwise range construction is similar.
Before. I think there's a little bit of Jack 6 that played before.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe it was mixing. Yeah.
Yeah. So trying to see if there's anything else to kind of pick up on, but all right. So I think that's probably all we can get out of this, other than what people can see in terms of some of the common cutoffs. So let me pull up an example of a readless range. So this is 16 big blinds as well. So still just min raising. I still just have actually, you can see it's just the same bottom of range. My experience is that people don't actually play wider. Like they actually play tighter 16 big blinds than they do deeper. And they only shove like a little bit more. So I kind of found that the two basically cancel out. And I just still want to open basically just as wide. And I still like trying to trap the top hands rather than shoving them like GTO does. Well, I guess GTO traps the suited ones too, but I generally prefer to try to trap these, but I think it's, shoving them can work well. I imagine at sort of lower stakes, you're probably going to get wider call shoves in general. With people kind of, I probably face players that are kind of scared money a little bit more than at low stakes you'll do. So I can see certainly open shoving these becoming better. And I think these are kind of close to like where I do just sometimes shove these depending on situation, especially versus regs. But I think that, given the fact that people overfold and under 3-bet, I often like just still sticking them into my min raise fold range and just taking advantage of that. Sometimes I still like limping them. You could still limp fold to shoves, or with ace 5, you can sometimes limp trap it if they're being extra aggro, or like limp shove it. So I sometimes mess around with this kind of bottom stuff, but it's pretty close. The one thing I guess I do a lot more of at this kind of stack depth is limping some of this middle stuff to avoid 3-bets and actually still to keep stack deeper, where these hands still kind of benefit from keeping stacks deep. And when you throw in kind of skill edge, it kind of makes up for some of the positional edge issues. And so versus random players, I often start trying to transition some of these hands into a limping range. But I think it's still pretty close to min raising.